Well, hello, free people of the Rocky Mountain region, and welcome to this Free State Colorado interview. Today, I'm joined by Cory Gaines. His Substack is the Colorado Accountability Project. Know what your government is doing and what you can do about it. Well, Cory, I hope you are well, and thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Doing well so far. Kind of busy at this time of year, being a teacher and then gardening as a hobby. And I should have picked a different hobby because when you're busy doing garden stuff, you're busy as a teacher.
That's a good point. Yeah, it's a busy time of year for sure.
Yeah.
Well, Cory, does the Colorado legislature have an accountability problem?
I think so. I think to a certain extent, it's somewhat bipartisan. Um, I would say less so than probably for the Republicans and for the Democrats. And maybe it's just because of the things that I care about and the things that I email about and that I watch about. But most definitely, I don't think that people are getting listened to um, in this state.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It seems like the legislators, the politicians, this whole political class has less interest in the public and what we want and what's good for the average person instead of just pushing an agenda that benefits, their special interests or their personal agenda.
Mhm. I would agree because when I look at the kinds of bills and then the kinds of things that they do, voters will say something very clearly at the polls. You turn around and a year later, 6 months later, they're taking actions in the legislature that thumb their nose at what the public wants. And so I'll give you a real clear example. We'll be talking about it later, but that alcohol enterprise, it was not more than, last November, or maybe it was a year or two ago. Voters clearly said if the revenue of an enterprise exceeds a certain amount, we want to be asked. And in the past, what they did with that Senate transportation bill last session, if I recall correctly, they made sure that it didn't exceed by taking their enterprises and chopping them up into tiny little pieces and doing multiple ones. And then in this session, they just completely throw away the idea that we're even going to do that subterfuge and say this enterprise here is exempt from that requirement. It's like, why did we even vote? Do you listen? Do you even care? I don't think they do sometimes, frankly.
Yeah, I think it's more about what they can get away with, what they can pull off, rather than really trying to represent the will of the voters or the people of Colorado.
Right. And the hard part is, I myself, I didn't start out as a real politico. I've learned, and in terms of my website and stuff, I'm probably what 3 or 4 years old in terms of being a political person. Right. I have a wife, I have a family, I have a full time job. I try to follow this stuff to the extent that I can. I can't imagine somebody with more kids or more commitments how on like and they can't see this stuff day to day. They don't follow this stuff day to day. And so the legislature, I think they feel free, just, yeah, we'll just kind of go ahead and do this. And then it's going to be like that plastic bags thing. They pass that. Nobody really notices. And then all of a sudden, after a year or two, you go on Walmart, can't get bags no more. We're like, what the hell just happened? Why can't I get a bag? Like, hey, you remember 2 years ago they did this thing? I think they count on that. They count on the fact that people are not going to necessarily be able to tune in and pay attention to all that they're doing.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's really unfortunate, I think it's one of the biggest challenges of having a representative government, a government of the people, where we're supposed to have citizen input really in the process. Is like you said, most people have families, they have jobs, they have other commitments. It's nearly impossible to keep track of all of the 700 plus bills that are going through the legislature, figure out how they affect you and your business and your family and your community, and then try and talk to your elected representative about it. I mean, it's very, very difficult. And so you can almost only pick a couple issues or a couple bills and really try and focus on it because it's just beyond the capabilities of an individual.
Exactly. Yeah. And made all the worse by the fact that, I saw a Colorado Politics article recently, and I forget the exact number, but this is, I think, this session ranks as number 5 in the last 25 years in terms of the number of bills, and it was something like 300 some odd bills have yet to even do anything in the last 2 or 3 weeks. And it's like, it is bad enough if they move at normal speed. When they speed up, like with the legislation that enabled Prop HH last year. So, like, I know you've had her on your show. I speak with her a fair bit. Natalie Menton, she told me that when she got wind that that thing was coming up. Now, Natalie Menton she's not a professional, but she is a well plugged in advocate. And even she struggled to get down there and testify because it was like introduce, testify 10 a.m., committee hearing, and it's out. And even somebody like that struggled to keep up. I mean, we're going to be doing 300 bills in 3 weeks. Good luck.
Yeah, exactly. No, yeah, Natalie did a great video with me kind of illustrating her rush to get down to the Capitol in the last week of last year's session, trying to show up, get involved, and have a voice, showing up on a day when you had hours notice that this bill was going to be heard and really trying to get people to be aware of it. So thankfully the voters rejected Proposition HH at the ballot box last year. But yeah, I think it's a perfect example of how the state government, these politicians trying to avoid accountability, like you said, with the plastic bag, kind of give it a year or two for it to take an effect. And then also there's so many bills going down there. They just know that the average person's not going to be able to pay attention, and they can kind of avoid some of that accountability that is so desperately needed.
Agreed. Yeah. And then the other thing how this stuff is complicated. If you're rewriting law that is for industries that take years to do things and millions of dollars, are they going to screw something up? Chances are they are. How much consideration and time is this stuff going to be? It's almost like we have to get a certain quantity of stuff through the machine, and if we don't, I would personally rather have quality. If it's a really good idea, my grandfather, his advice on voting for stuff was when it comes to vote your ballot, if you're unsure, vote no. Because if it's a really good idea, you can always do it again next year. But it doesn't seem like that's that's the motto. It's like we got to get this stuff through the machine, through the machine, through the machine without, I think, adequate consideration.
Oh, that's a great point, Cory. Really good point, and definitely agree with his advice there on voting. It's probably better to be cautious for the voters to kind of be a little bit more skeptical of some of these initiatives or propositions that come through and say, hey, let's hold on a second, see if you can bring it back, maybe refine it. Let's look into it a little bit more.
Right. Yeah. Nothing wrong with waiting.
Well, Cory, I did put together some slides about some of the bills going on this year. I know you have some interest. You've testified on some of these bills, so I'd love to get some input from you. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. All right. So kind of titled the slide deck here, the Colorado Legislature Accountability Problem, and definitely recommend people check out your Substack, coloradoaccountabilityproject.substack.com. Definitely a great resource. Really appreciate all the work you do there. And I also really appreciate all your articles that you put out for Complete Colorado. Definitely a website I check every day.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's weird. I would have never imagined I would have enjoyed it this much. It started out as something that during COVID. Like I say, I'm not much of a politico, and I started doing this stuff during COVID, as much as anything because I would write email after email after email to the Senate leadership and the governor. I'm like, why is the legislature ceding its power to the governor? Why are you doing this? And the only people I'd ever hear back from were the Republicans. And the Republicans would say, here, Cory, good points. Thank you. But we don't have the numbers. And never a Democrat wrote back, not even to say you're full of BS, just nothing. And so I thought, I want to start taking this stuff directly to the people. And I've been kind of writing about it ever since. And I find for me, myself, like getting involved in doing the writing is a good way to feel like, even if I don't feel necessarily like I've accomplished a whole lot, that I've done something. I've not just sat still because sitting still was getting harder and harder and harder. So thank you. I find it helpful for me and I really enjoyed it.
Great. Well, yeah, definitely suggest people check out your work and get informed. And I really agree with you too. It's like, I think a lot, you probably are the same like me. I wish I could do more. There's challenges, there's time constraints in what we're able to do, but hey, do something, use your voice
Mhm.
how you can. It might not be the end all be all, but hey, it's something. And if everybody kind of did a little bit more, maybe we could turn the ship around, right?
Yeah, and we could touch on it later too if you wanted. I liked what you said earlier about focusing in because that's something that I've recommended to people. And we can touch on that later more if you want.
Perfect. Well, let's jump in and look at a couple of the bills that have either made it through the session this year or are still being debated, but really highlight this accountability issue, I think. So, looking at the slide here, we're talking about Senate Bill 157, Colorado Open Meetings Law for the General Assembly. So, concerning clarifying the application of the Colorado Open Meetings Law to the Colorado General Assembly. Now, this bill was passed by both the Senate and the House, signed by Governor Polis back in March 12th. So, a bill they pushed through pretty quickly. I think they wanted to make sure it became law while the session was still occurring. But Cory, what can you tell us about this bill?
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it, but I can't help but think that you're right that part of the reason for the speed because it just shot through there quick as could be. I can't help but think that part of the reason for the speed was the fact that they wanted it to apply to this session. I'm surprised that the governor, I mean, he rolled over, he folded faster than Superman on laundry day, like I heard on The Simpsons once, on this bill. This thing was a bad idea. And I really took exception to the way that it was done. Basically, what it does is exempts the entire legislature from open meetings law. And open meetings law has been kind of a foundation in Colorado politics for a long, long time. And whether you I get the idea that I think the legislators here were thinking to themselves that they're concerned they've already been sued twice, they've lost twice. I think that they were concerned about their ability to conduct business, but you know what? It was like something I think I said either in an open email or when I testified. If you're in doubt, here's what you do: you be cautious and you be open about stuff. Um, there is no problem at all with having more openness rather than less, unless you're trying to do stuff. And unless you're trying to kind of play games and you don't want people finding out. Why on earth would you try to hide it otherwise? Um, and when this bill came up, it was funny because Senator Fenberg, he was the sponsor and he introduced it into the committee hearing. And it was my understanding they'll do sometimes with bills, they'll put it into the committee and they'll just like, let's toss this out here for discussion and let's all sit and let's talk about it and talk about it. And Fenberg does like to talk because he talked a long time about this bill. Then, Freedom of Information and a couple other groups got up and testified against it. I testified against it. No one testified in a for position. And so then the committee, they stroke their beards and everybody talks and we all go home. And I think I had the impression that this thing was just going to stall out. Well, a couple 3 days later, it's like, well, it's onto the committee of the whole, meaning it goes to the whole Senate. I don't know what the hell just happened. First, it's up for discussion, and now it's out of committee. And so I can't help but think that not only is the bill trying to hide stuff, but then they sneak it out of committee after saying, well, we just wanted to have some discussion. And then it shuttles its way on through the House on a complete party line vote and off to the governor.
Yeah, and I really wanted to include the prime sponsors of this bill because Fenberg, Senate President, McCluskey, Speaker of the House. I mean, these are the leaders of both chambers really pushing this. I mean, this is coming from the top down, and of course,
Mm-hmm.
Krista Great Kennedy. He loves some bad ideas down there, so no surprise he attached himself to this one. But yeah, just another example of what these are supposed to be really in support of, right? Is this open, democratic, constitutional government, this representative government, democracy that these legislators claim to love so much, of this government where the people are holding the politicians accountable and people have a voice, and then you see something like this come through, and it's really a shame because Colorado does have so many great sunshine laws, and I love how you brought up they've been sued twice, and they're in this position. Hey, they're sued. Well, they could go ahead and change the law to avoid future lawsuits. How nice it is to be a legislator, right?
Yeah, I mean, if only I could do that. Like if I got reprimanded twice at my job, you know, and then I turned around and said, "Well, I'm just going to change the rules of my job so I never get reprimanded again." Boy, that'd be cool, wouldn't it?
That'd be pretty nice, yeah. So looking at a couple more notes on this bill here, what really makes it so bad, like you were pointing out, is exempting the legislators from the Colorado Opens Meetings law, specifically by redefining what public business is, right? Because public business is what's subject to these open meeting laws. So they say, well, what we're doing here is not necessarily considered public business. Maybe in the past there was some ambiguity, some gray area where we're working on bills behind the scenes, and you would think that that would be public business, that people, the voters, the public has a right to know of how these bills are being formed, how these bills are being created, who's pushing for them, kind of the conversations behind this legislation. But these legislators really want to avoid that, unfortunately. So by changing the definition of public business, they're able to avoid this Cora request, avoid some of these open meetings laws.
Hmm. And they also allow themselves to skirt around some of the notice requirements. And another big deal in this, you have to watch these little details, because this has been the subject of lawsuits, not at the assembly, but in other places. But it probably goes by various terms, but it's like a serial meeting. So I talk to Jill, Jill talks to Bob, Bob talks to Sam. And now four people have had a meeting and there's been no public notice and no one can understand what's going on there. So that was another huge turd in this bill, I thought.
Definitely. Yeah. One of the bad things this bill does. Looking at how they define this is a screenshot from the bill that was signed by Governor Polis that did become law, but they define public business. People can look this up on the legislative website. Definitely a great resource there. But really defining public business, I go to that section C, section 2 down there below section C, where it says does not include matters that are by nature interpersonal, administrative, or logistical, or that concern personnel, planning, process, training, or operations if the merits of substance of matters set forth in the subsection of the section are not discussed. So they're basically saying, if it doesn't have to do with the bill exactly, the formation of this legislation, then it's not really included. So really trying to kind of redefine what that means and make it harder for people to have an understanding of some of the background of how this legislation is created, like you said. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, really shameful. But one of the good things, like you said, you mentioned the Freedom of Information Coalition. They do great work. They're really one of the only people fighting for openness in government here in Colorado, and they testified against it as well, like you said. But they had this article come out just a couple weeks ago talking about a ballot title. There's a proposed initiative to repeal this law, so that's good to hear. And just wanted
Mhm.
to point out, like you said, why they oppose this bill. I think this provides some extra level of nuance to the discussion here. But the Colorado Freedom of Information Coalition opposed the
Yep.
bill, testifying in committee hearings that it'll encourage state lawmakers to formulate and debate public business in an unlimited way via email, text message, and ephemeral messaging apps such as Signal without the public's knowledge and scrutiny. If such electronic communications haven't already been deleted, they stressed they will likely would not be available to request because the Colorado Open Records Act excludes, quote, all documents prepared or assembled by a member of the General Assembly relating to the drafting of bills or amendments from the definition of public records. They're considered work product. So, Cory, what's wrong with that?
Well, so the idea is like, I mentioned the serial meetings before, but you also have this stuff here where, they can do things via text. And the one of the ways that Fenberg tried to blunt the edge of this thing or to try and put a happy face on it was to say, well, we're going to exclude all this stuff so that it's not under open meetings law, but you can always Cora request it. But then they also excluded a bunch of stuff from Cora requests, so it is essentially meaningless. That little sop that he put in the bill is essentially meaningless because, as they say here, the Cora requests. Anytime somebody says it's a work product, it's excluded. right? I mean, there's been plenty. I don't know if you've ever tried it, but if you ever try to get information on drafting of bills or who was a stakeholder, and by the way, for everyone out there listening, when they talk about stakeholders, that ain't you. It's never taxpayers. You get to pay it, but you ain't a stakeholder. So like basically what they do is they say, well, we're going to exclude this stuff, but you could still core it, but then you can't really core it because they'll just say, well, it's work product, we don't have to share.
Wow. Wow, yeah, and I think you highlighted something that's really important there too. Is it seems like there's so much legislation that pops up in Colorado that is just kind of a carbon copy of other states that we've seen. And I always wonder, it's like, who's behind this? Who wrote this bill? Where did it come from? Who are these stakeholders or these lobbyists or this organization that just fed this bill, this already written legislation to our legislators to make it law here? I feel like there needs to be more transparency, more openness around that process for sure.
Mm-hmm. Right. And or they say, oh, we've done a lot of stakeholder meetings and we've talked to everybody, and I don't understand why they're complaining. It's like, I wonder, because if this trade industry group says you never talked to them, but then you say they did, who's telling the truth and who ain't telling the truth here? Oh, we did a lot of stakeholder meetings. Well, they met with a lot of environmentalists, maybe. They didn't meet with anybody from industry.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Yeah, definitely. Definitely a bad bill. Really disappointed in the legislator. Disappointed in Jared Polis too for signing Senate Bill 157 and really making it harder for the people of Colorado to know what our General Assembly is doing.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And if you get a chance, sign the petition for that thing that repeals it.
Oh, perfect.
If the
Yeah.
legislature is gonna, if they're gonna give us, if they're gonna thumb their nose at us, we turn right around and say, you know what, not okay. Sign that petition if you get a chance.
Yeah, the citizen petition process is definitely one of the best avenues we have. That's true direct democracy right there, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So another bill, House Bill 1296, kind of in a similar vein right here, right? This idea I keep trying to come back to of avoiding accountability, to tie into your Substack there. Really, these legislators trying to hide what they're doing or obscure it or make it a little bit harder for the voting public to be aware of it. Just another way for them to protect themselves at the expense of our democracy, right? So what can you tell us
Mm-hmm.
about 1296 here?
Yeah, I first off, I if you look at the sponsors right down there, Representative Soper, highly, highly disappointed in that. And it's a good thing to mention just before I talk about the bill. If you live in a district or a place that's represented by a Republican and you think, therefore, that you're safe and you don't need to contact your representatives or your senators or watch them, don't. Because, I mean, I'm not saying that he's a real liberal or a real squishy conservative, but he shows up on bills like this, and I'm thinking to myself, like, what are you doing here? Why are you behind this effort? Because this seems anathema to what I would consider values that Republicans or conservatives would have. But anyway, sorry for the digression. So Cora requests are something that I do a fair bit of, and it's basically you can go and it's free. It's if you go to CFOIC, there's a guide. You could check my website, message me. It's pretty easy to do. And if you do it well, you don't end up paying a bunch of money. But you can go core request and get information on what your government is up to. You can look at calendars, you can look at budget requests, you can look at emails and things like that. What this bill does or did, it's been highly amended, but what this bill did was there's timelines. You send in a core request, they have 3 days to answer you. If they're busy, they can say, gosh, we need more time. They got 10 days. And I generally don't have any issue with that, right? I'm not under deadline, whatever. But this thing lengthened that time frame. And it's in its original form, it also allowed records custodians to say somebody was being, quote, vexatious. And then that would allow them to say, well, you don't get to make core requests for some period of time. I think it was like 3 months or something like that. This is another one I testified against. It's another bad bill. And it's been heavily amended, but it's trundling its way through the system. Now, at my last check, I think it's waiting, I believe the Senate, but it doesn't have a calendar hearing. Is that right? I think we were talking about that earlier. Is that right?
Correct. This bill did pass through the House, unfortunately, but yeah, it is awaiting committee scheduling in the Senate. Just yesterday, on April 29th, it was assigned to the State Veterans and Military Affairs Committee, but does not so far have a hearing. And with less than 2 weeks left in the legislature, that's probably a good thing.
Right. And one of the things that me, as somebody who, I do something similar to media, I suppose probably under some legal definitions, I would qualify as a member of the media, I believe. Um, but this bill, among others, does something that's really concerning to me. And that is it lets the government get in the mix of saying, you're media, you're not. And also, you get special privileges, but you regular folk don't. That I find really, really, really angering, number one. And number two, I think it's just a terrible idea. And that was, and if I'm not mistaken, might still be in this bill, among others. And it's one thing that bill sponsors will do to, in my view, buy the silence of the media or buy their acquiescence on bills like this. And of course, our media, stalwart defenders of truth and freedom and alone on the bridge defending your rights to information, a lot of times they just don't say anything about it because, hey, we like our exemption, right? We like being special. Not only this bill, but there's another one about other core requests where the media are exempted. You regular people, no. And that really irritates me. It creates two classes of citizens and it lets the government pick.
Yeah, great point. The special carve outs for the media, I definitely a way to buy them off, right? Buy their acquiescence, and hey, this you don't have to talk about how bad this bill is. Go focus on something else. Talk about a different issue. You guys are going to be okay. Who cares about those public or those citizen journalists or those citizens out there who want to have their own blog or website or making their own videos, right? They don't need to have the privilege that you and the media have. So. Definitely a way for
Right.
them to buy them off. I never thought of it that way, but that sounds so true.
Or even I remember it was on this bill or it was on another one. There was quite a feisty group of parents, and I think it was from Larimer County, and they were having a
Mm.
fight back and forth with the school district over. It was something about buses and maybe disabled children or something like that. So it isn't even a case of like, oh, hey, bloggers, but it's like anything that the government is trying to do to get in between you and information from your government is just a bad idea. Plain and simple.
Definitely. Definitely. And I mean, they explain this bill, go to the next slide here, but they really explain this bill. The bill sponsors do as a way to help out, say local governments, the county clerks or municipal clerks who are the ones tasked with providing this information under our Open Records Act. And they're just being weighed down, these poor government employees, hey, you want information about these kids being abused or these potential predators in the schools, just sit down, parents, these county, these local school employees or local city employees, they got so much important work to do. We don't need to get you that information right away. So these legislators, that's what they're claiming. They're helping alleviate that workload, kind of provide some extra. They're standing up for their local governments and their communities so that they don't have to be responding to the public as much. Which you would think, if the government has any job whatsoever, it's to represent the public, to respond to them, to have citizen access because that's who they're working for. But yeah, it's a total denial of the how the government's supposed to operate, really.
I'm saying you took the words right out of my mouth with that. And there's another one. I think it was another Fenberg special, and it was to deal with. It was a change to election laws, but there was also some Cora stuff embedded in that, and kind of the same thing. And I feel exactly the same way. If it would, okay, so the county clerk's office, sometimes they might also be the records custodian for the county. Okay, so the elections are job one. Outside of that, what else do you have to do that could be more important than helping a citizen navigate their government? And if it's on the slide right there, it's sort of in the middle. Something I didn't mention earlier, but I think it's worth noting, the multiple requests within 14 days can be treated the same for fees. Somebody like me, I have zero budget. A news organization might have budget. I have no budget. I'm a teacher, like I said. I don't make money. So, what I will often do is, and not to pester people, I'm not a jerk because I think it's really counterproductive. It's like trying to piss off the lunch lady. You don't do that. Not unless you don't want like shorted on your desserts or whatever, right? So you don't make receptionists and lunch ladies angry, and you don't do it with core request people either. But what I'll do is I'll do multiple requests and I'll make them small enough that they fit within the 1 hour's time. You're allowed 1 hour of free work. I'll make them small enough to do that. And then sort of like in artillery, like you bracket your target and kind of work in until you find what it is you're looking for. And then that way you don't spend money trying to do this. Well, guess what that multiple request thing does? It's going to lengthen the amount of time at the very least for me to zero in on stuff like this.
Right. And then they can take away your free 1 hour, right? If it's within 14 days, they say, hey, wait a second, let's add all this together and calculate how much time it's going to take, how much information you're actually looking for. And then they can start assigning you those fees. Those fees are only going up,
Mhm.
being tied to inflation and being able to increase over time. So it's going to get a little bit more difficult. And that's what this bill seems to do, is just make it a little bit more difficult, maybe a lot more difficult for certain people to have access to their government, to understand what these elected representatives or bureaucrats, but nonetheless, government employees are doing. I mean, do these legislators think that their role is over there? Who are they representing? Really, they're representing the government at the expense of the people.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I mean, and it was funny because that one that I mentioned earlier for Fenberg with the uh, exemptions in Cora on his election bill, the somebody from the County Clerks Association testified in favor of that bill. So that tells you something.
Definitely. Yeah. So, here we go. Let's make it easier on the government by making it harder for people to find out what's going on, delaying those response times, taking longer, being able to charge more fees. But of course, that special carve outs for the media there, just absolutely outrageous.
Mm-hmm.
Let's move on to a little bit different subject that still is, I would say, and I know you agree with me, these politicians, these legislators, these government officials trying to avoid accountability. And in this regard, it's avoiding their accountability under the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, our wonderful protections for taxpayers in Colorado. This signature legislation, one of the reasons we're still as free as we are, as we have as low of a tax burden as we still do, to the chagrin of so many of these politicians. But what are enterprises, Cory?
Yeah. So just a quick backup in case folks don't know. So Tabor requires, in theory, that the politicians, if they want to put a new tax on, that they have to ask. Now, in some local jurisdictions, they've done what's called detaboring or sometimes debrucing, where they say we don't have to ask anymore, but that was put to a vote of the people. So there's been several. So after Tabor passed, the legislature, and again, this is a case where it would definitely be bipartisan. This is not necessarily something Democrats alone own. Republicans own this too. This is more a politician versus taxpayer thing than a Democrat versus taxpayer thing, just to be clear. So, there was a series of Colorado State Supreme Court decisions that basically said two things. One, if it's a fee, you're not required to ask voter approval. And they defined a fee as something where it's like, I give the government money specifically for one thing, and the government takes that money and only uses it for that one thing. So next time your car registration comes up, read the lengthy, long as my arm list of fees that are now what you get charged on your registration. And so, like the bridge and tunnel fee, I pay this fee. It goes to a special account, and that account is, in theory, supposed to pay to fix bridges, tunnels, whatever, right? An enterprise is similar. It's similar in the sense that it allows politicians to evade having to ask you for more money. But what characterizes it and what makes it different is you can think of an enterprise like a government run business. So it's set up, and it is yet another one of those unelected boards appointed by somebody, sometimes approved by the Senate, sometimes not. They appoint a board. This board charges a fee or charges a price for things, and then it doles out that money that it brings in. So it's like it would be you who pays money to the enterprise are a customer of this government business. And then the thing that makes it not a tax, according to our delightfully partisan Colorado State Supreme Court, is that then this business gives you a service, something of value. So if we're talking about the one here that's on your screen, and this is another one I testified against, in general, what I try to do is if there's an enterprise bill that comes up, I try to get in there and testify. This particular one, anytime you rent a car anywhere in the state of Colorado, and even if you rent a U-Haul, so it isn't just like you come here and you rent a car. You want to move, you rent a U-Haul to haul your stuff from one apartment to another or whatever. You're going to pay this fee. And I think it's like on your screen, it can be up to $3 a day. And this is the whole state. You pay into this enterprise. And then this state will use that money to do things like put passenger rail going from, say, Denver out to far northwest Colorado, Steamboat Springs, Craig, etc. Put at that lovely dream of a railway that goes from Fort Collins all the way down to Pueblo. I don't think they're going to run any rail out to my neck of the woods out here on the Eastern Plains. I'll still get to pay for it. So what do I receive as a benefit? And if you read this, it's in the language of the bill, absurd as it sounds, at least to me. The benefit I will receive is cleaner air and less traffic congestion because of all the people that are going to be on these railroad trains going back and forth all the time. So I paid, and the benefit I get is this ephemeral idea of cleaner air somewhere and a better climate, maybe. That's the return I get. Now, like when I testified against this bill, one of the bad things about it is they liken it to a business, and supposedly I'm getting a benefit, but if I go to a business and I give them money and they don't give me something that I see of as valuable anymore, I don't go to that business anymore. Or maybe they give me something that I don't like or that doesn't work and I try to return it and maybe get my money back. You can't do that with an enterprise. I couldn't go to the state and say, hey, I want my money back because I don't think the air is any cleaner now than it was, and I-25 is still as much of a mess as it was. Can I have my money back? You ain't getting it back.
Right. A government-owned business is just a business you can't opt out of, right? You can't not do business with. A business you're
Right.
forced to go to forced to pay money to. I mean, how is that not a tax? Are you kidding me? I mean, how
Uh-huh.
ridiculous is this, you know? So here's
Yeah.
this fee, everybody renting cars, you know, they're gonna spend billions, collect billions of dollars, and then 30 years down the road, potentially put some trains in. I mean, absolutely ridiculous. I mean, talk about avoiding accountability because, of course, the Taxpayer Bill of Rights requires these politicians to go to the public, to go to the voters, ask for a tax increase. They have to ask for a tax increase. But hey, they don't want to do that because nobody wants to pay more taxes. I mean, we saw that even in quote unquote blue Colorado, you know, people turn down Proposition HH. They don't want to give up their tax refunds, their tax rebates. They want to keep their tax money. So these legislators like Fenberg, they know that this ask for the voters is dead on arrival. They're not going to vote to increase taxes. Are you kidding me? Especially on U-Hauls and rental vehicles. Come on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think people would be perfectly willing, and they have shown a willingness in the past, and I myself would be too. You know, if my local government came to me and said, and they have in the past, we need more money for the fire department. I mean, they're running around in raggedy coats and they're using buckets for helmets, and we need more money. And here's what we're going to ask you for, 5 mil increase on sales tax, and it's going to be for 2 years, and then it's gone, and it goes straight to the fire department. I think people in general probably are okay with that stuff because people are not dumb and they see value in the things that they get. But when it becomes just a general ask, just we need more money, we need more money because the government is not willing to do what families everywhere have to do, which is when time get tight, I have to reprioritize my budget. They're not willing to do that. So it's always a case of we just need more. Like, how much more? When are you going to stop asking for more? What are you going to put it to? It's like, no, 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 no. Don't worry about that. Just more. Just give us more.
Yeah, that's above our pay grade. We
That
don't know.
thing.
Yeah, absolutely ridiculous. Let's take a look at a couple more enterprises. So this bill was this year, right? I talked about this bill on another video with Natalie a couple weeks ago, Senate Bill 184, but let's look at a couple more too. Um, here's the one you mentioned, Senate Bill 181, the Alcohol Impact and Recovery Enterprise. So, you're going to pay a fee, right, from manufacturers and wholesalers who distribute alcohol. They're going to pay this fee, right? And it's going to be used for alcohol related substance use disorder prevention, early intervention treatment, blah blah blah. It continues on. But so Cory, what's wrong with making these evil alcohol companies pay for recovery?
Well, first off, apparently, the only kind of alcohol that's bad for you is the one that comes from bigger companies and hard alcohol. Because all the places where they've got the people with the man buns and drinking craft beer and things like that, that kind of alcohol is okay because that alcohol was excluded. It's the other kind of alcohol that's bad. So after we got that, second, you know, we're putting it on the manufacturers, but let's be honest, it's going to end up coming to us one way or another. And the thing, I kind of alluded to it earlier, and we're finally here. This is that bill that I was talking about earlier, where the legislators basically said we're going to exempt ourselves from, I believe it was Prop 117, where voters said if the enterprise revenue exceeds 100 million over 5 years, I forget the details, but if the enterprise, excuse me, if the enterprise revenue exceeds a certain amount over a certain period of time, you have to ask. And this bill basically says, at least in its original form, it's my understanding it got amended and thus it won't be making as much money, I hope. But this bill basically said it's going to exceed that amount and we're not going to have to ask because this bill is exempt.
There you go. How nice is that? Just voters say one thing. Well, we're going to put in the bill that whatever the voters said, it just doesn't apply to this one. Well, why? Because we wrote it into the bill. That's part of the bill that's going to become law that it doesn't apply. I mean, come on, people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was something else. Now I have heard. I'm not as up on this. Somebody else might have known, or you might see. Maybe it was Caldera did an op-ed about it. There's also some funny business going on here where the money from this becomes sort of a slush fund and might be used for also other kinds of addiction treatments like fentanyl and things like that. But I have to be honest, I don't know as much about that. I just know there's been some shade tossed about that.
Yeah, no, I would not be surprised. During my legislative call this week, do a legislative live stream during the session. There's another bill, this Justice Fund, where the money is going to be going to organizations that are going to help along with this agenda. And, of course, some of those organizations we know are tied to the legislators. They're either allies or donors, or maybe the legislators themselves work for some of these nonprofits that are going to directly benefit potentially from this legislation. So I wouldn't at all be surprised if an enterprise like this or any enterprise out there, that money somehow ends up in a politically connected organization, and somebody out there gets the money who, I mean, Kevin Prill is out of office after this session, so who knows what he's going to do next? Maybe he's setting himself up for for his next career for all I know. It's just so dishonest
Well,
what they do. Yeah.
yeah. And it's not unheard of. If anybody's interested in the context, go look up Connect for Health Colorado. And the funny business they had, they get government money. And then they were using that money at a fundraiser for Democrats. And the guy that runs it's like, oops, yeah, I take full responsibility. I actually emailed that organization and said, so are you going to give the money back or what does taking responsibility mean? And of course, I never heard anything from him. So maybe other than just saying he took responsibility, but yeah, this stuff it's not a conspiracy. It's not unheard of that that sort of thing happens.
Yeah, it's the nature of politics. In fact, I would go so far as to say. One more want to bring up here, kind of a bill that's sliding under the radar for sure. Not a lot of people are aware of it, but another example of an enterprise. You would think if they want to raise taxes for 911 services, you think the voters pretty much anywhere would say, yeah, that's probably something we're willing to pay for, is so that if there's an emergency, if something's going on, you have access to that service, right? But these legislators, they're gonna play it safe here and say, hey, we got this tool we can use called an enterprise, and we can push this through and start collecting fees. Sure, only 50 cents per month per 911 access connection. You know, uh, we all know who's going to end up paying it in the end, but just another example of how this lazy legislating really is what it comes down to. Is uh, Here's an easy out for them to raise some revenue without going to the voters.
Yep. Or, like I said earlier, without having to do what you and I and every other family on in this state has to do when money gets tight. Well, I just don't have the money. I'm going to have to reprioritize. Golly, it'd be nice to take a vacation, but our water heater's dead. We got to fund that. And is it just me, or is this Chris DeGry Kennedy just golly? It seems like he's on a lot of the stuff tonight.
Yeah, he's one of the worst down there. Absolutely crazy. I know you covered some of the other bills, 1311, I believe, the tax credit, and some of the others out there. Of course, one of the main authors of Proposition HH last year. So yeah, definitely one of the people behind a lot of this legislation, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, hey, great. What a wonderful little tool they found, a way to hack and cheat the system, right? How they can hack the Constitution. It should be one of those clickbait ads, 10 ways you can circumvent the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. Number three is using an enterprise, to
Yeah.
no need to balance the budget, no need to ask for the voters. We're just gonna figure out a way to take more money out of 911 calls, rental cars, you name it. It's got to end.
Yep.
It's got to stop. I mean, come on.
It would be nice. I keep thinking, and I don't know if this is a good segue for it or not, but if like something need like people need to figure out a way to start making more noise about these things. There are certain voters, and it would be like, say, for example, yeah, like in Representative DeGray Kennedy's district. I'm pretty sure that there are districts probably in and around the Front Range where the devil himself, as long as he had a D after his name for Democrat, can get elected. Just like there's probably districts where you could say the same about Republicans, right? I mean, there's Republicans. I'm actually a registered independent that could get elected no matter what. And people just need to start, like educating themselves, and they need to start speaking up about these things, because these things do tend to fly under the radar. And you have to start standing up and calling your legislator and be like, this is not okay. Because no matter how sympathetic the cause is, you have to remember that the government never generates money. The money that the government gets comes from your wallet. It comes from my family. So when they talk about, well, we're just going to take a little bit of money and we're going to give it to rail, or we're going to take some money from you and we're going to give it so that poor people can have heat in the winter. It's not necessarily that those are bad things, but that money doesn't just appear from nowhere, and the government doesn't make it. The government takes it from me, and every dollar that comes out of my wallet is one less dollar I have to spend on my family. So I would strongly encourage people to get involved. And like you had said earlier, it's sort of a part-time job for me, and it's something that I do for entertainment, my own like stress relief about this stuff that kind of tends to frustrate me. But it doesn't necessarily need to be that way. You can pick an issue and follow it. And it may, your testifying may not necessarily change anything, but when you do and when others do, and sometimes these people, like these sponsors on these bills, I'll testify there, I'll testify in front of other committees. And it's almost like the room goes quiet, because I think they're, by this point, we're into year 4 of single party control in this state, single party dominance. they don't hear people who have different opinions. Like I'll go to a air quality control commission meeting and I will wait my turn to testify, and it is advocate after advocate after advocate reading from a script about environmental justice and air pollution and Latinos. And fine, have your opinion. It's okay. What they don't hear is people who get on and say, is this how the government ought to be running? Should like four unelected bureaucrats be making such a huge intrusion into and it's funny because I'll testify and say something like that and the room gets kind of quiet because I don't think they hear it. And what that means is that not enough people who share my opinions or, run of the mill everyday people. We don't have to agree on everything, but I'm betting we agree on a lot more than we disagree about. Get up and say, look at what you're doing, and this is not okay.
Well said, Cory. Well, it's a segue as well here into the last slide here. So, we've talked a lot about the legislators, politicians in general, not wanting to be held accountable. So you already touched on a little bit, Cory, but what can we do about it? What can we do to hold our elected representatives more accountable?
I think one good way to do it is to get in contact with them. My state senator is Senator Pelton, and I am in contact with him, and he's a great guy, just like Senator Sonnenberg was before. We agree politically, but more importantly, they excuse me, they answer phone calls and they answer emails. They may not be able to do a whole lot, but sometimes if I can tell them something, they might be able to turn around and say something in the committee. Other things, if there was this group of nuns, it's been a long time, and they would buy one share of stock in a cigarette company or one share of stock in a firearms company or something. Their politics don't match mine. But when you own that one share of stock, you can speak. You're guaranteed the right to speak at a stockholder meeting, right? The good thing is that here in Colorado, you don't have to own stock in anything. Go sign up. Like, let's say, for example, that early childhood education is your passion. Go to the Department of Early Childhood Education, sign up for their email notifications, watch what they're doing, and go and speak at a meeting. You don't need to be an expert, doesn't need to become a full-time job. Make that your one thing. Go there and say, why are you making this rule? What sense does this make? Is this the way that government ought to run? Outside of that, write a letter to the editor. Go to your city council meeting. Go to a county commissioners meeting. Everybody pays attention to federal politics, but it's state and even more so the real local stuff that has a huge and immediate impact on your life. And that stuff doesn't require a lot of time or attention to stay involved in. Or start talking to friends. You know what I mean? Encourage your friends to do stuff. If you don't have the wherewithal, you're kind of shy about it, which I understand. It was something you lean into. It's something you kind of get practiced at, with speaking in committees and stuff. And the first few times I was really nervous. So you start out by maybe having these kind of discussions with your friends, because who knows? Maybe you talk to a friend and that friend gets irritated and that friend writes a letter to the editor and somebody reads that letter to the editor and then they go to a meeting and they say something, right? Like, any positive thing is bigger than zero. So just do something.
Really appreciate that, Cory. That was very well said, and I couldn't agree more. I encourage people to subscribe to your Substack. It's coloradoaccountabilityproject.substack.com. Follow you on Twitter, or X as it's known now, and definitely go on Complete Colorado. That's page2.completecolorado.com/author /Cory-Gaines, and definitely look at your articles there. But really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule. I'll let you get back to gardening, and thank you very much for all your hard work and everything you do. But
Yeah.
take care, Cory, and appreciate you.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate you having me on. It was nice to talk with you. And actually, because I know we've corresponded a few times here and there. So it was nice to actually talk to you more in person. So
Yeah, you as well. Keep up the fight, and hope to talk to you again soon.
thank you. Yeah, you too.